You gotta wake up to a world that's real. You gotta rise up and make it feel. Life in full measure is more than just pleasure. Wake up and live.
Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio on Thursday, November the 20th, 2014. I have a new guest on the line today, Mr. David McGowan, joining me appropriately enough from La La Land. Appropriate because of the topic which we'll be discussing today, which is the truly dark, and some would say satanic history of the rock and roll and hippie movements. Since LA, not San Francisco, is the true birthplace of modern rock music and the hippie culture, it is appropriate that a resident of this city of angels, mostly angels of darkness, I would think, would be the one to expose the truth about this time and place that most people believe was a time of great brotherly love and peace. David graduated from UCLA with a degree in psychology and has since 1990 run a small business in the greater Los Angeles area. David's books include Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, with the subheading Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. His other books are Programmed to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder, and Understanding the F Word, American Fascism and the Politics of Illusion. His first book was Derailing Democracy, which is a book that I read around 2003, but it was not till today that I realized that it had been written by David. So without further ado, hello and welcome, Dave. Hello, Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay. All right. Can you hear me clearly?
I can. During your intro, you dropped out at one point for a few seconds. I'm not sure why, but other than that, it seems a good connection.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good. There was a little bit of a pause between me saying hello, Dave, and before you responded. So I thought maybe there's some kind of connection problem. But you sound clear, so that's good. So Dave, since you're new on this program, maybe we can begin by I'm kind of curious to know, how does a guy with a degree in psychology become a journalist and author? What led you down the rabbit holes, very dark ones I might add, that have so radically altered your view of our world?
I guess the short answer to that would be that at some point I saw a void that I thought needed to be filled. I've always questioned. I've always had lingering questions about just what is the true nature of our government and our role in the world, and I've always been one to ask questions and not just blindly accept the official version of events. And so I've always kind of gravitated towards the alternative media, so to speak. And that process really was accelerated when I first got on the internet in the late 90s, I think in like 97 or something like that. And it opened up just a whole new world of research opportunities for me. And I pretty quickly decided to put up my own website, and it just kind of grew from there. I had no formal training whatsoever as a journalist. I had actually kind of avoided writing as much as possible. In my college career, I tended to gravitate towards classes that didn't require a lot of writing. So a lot of people were probably surprised when I decided that I was going to become a writer, and I wasn't really very good at it at first, and I will readily acknowledge that. And I've kind of learned on the just learned from my own mistakes basically, and just sort of developed. My first website went up, and after a couple of years, I got an offer from a publisher. Unsolicited. They came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in turning the material on my site into a book, and at that point, I wasn't doing a lot of original writing. I was just sort of, just taking it, just sort of congregating other people's work, into one place where people could find it. So that initial website became the first book that you mentioned, Derailing Democracy, and from there it just kind of took off. I just kept working on the website, and I've written a few additional books, and it just kind of happened, just for whatever reason. There were things that I felt needed to be said, and information that I felt needed to be put out there, and so I just sort of fashioned myself into into a writer.
Your writing style actually is very, I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but it is immensely readable, and therefore, even though you may not have had formal training, your writing style is something that I think hits home with people, and which is why I think your latest book, especially Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, I think is proven to be quite popular. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's taken off beyond my wildest expectations. Yeah. I mean, it's just as of I think at last count, it has something like 109 Amazon reviews, which is just mind-boggling to me because my other books have been bouncing around on Amazon for up to 12 years. I think the first one was released in actually like 14 years, because I think Derailing Democracy was released in 2000, I believe. And it hasn't gotten, it's gotten, I don't know, like 30 something reviews, I think, in 14 years. And the new one has gotten 109 reviews in 6 months. So it's just, I mean, exponentially taken off from any of my previous work. It really seems to resonate with a lot of people, and across a lot of lines. I mean, gender lines, national lines, political lines. I mean, people from all walks of life really seem to have gravitated to this material, and which is very gratifying, because I put a lot of work into it, and I've been told by other people that my writing style is very accessible and very entertaining. And people have told me that once they start reading the book, it's very hard to put down, which is just a huge compliment. And so I think in a way it's kind of good that I never had any formal training, and I don't write in a formal journalistic way, but rather in kind of a conversational style. And which, like you said, it really seems to resonate with people. People have told me that reading my books is like just like sitting around the dinner table with an old friend, just listening to him, spin these wild, crazy stories. And so yeah, it's been very gratifying to see that after all these years of working in obscurity and anonymity, basically, that my work is finally being noticed and appreciated by people. So yeah, it's been a very interesting experience, and of course it's also brought out a lot of haters. And I've experienced stuff that I hadn't experienced before, in a negative kind of way on Amazon and Facebook and whatnot. And it's kind of opened my eyes to some of the tactics that are used to try to, discredit and tarnish people's reputations and whatnot.
Well,
So,
I suppose that goes with the territory that if you do come up with information which is, which first of all is accurate, and secondly, if it's not, very complimentary to the establishment, then yes, there is going to be attacks, which I think in many ways actually are a confirmation of the work that you have done in this book. And that's the
I
book.
yeah, I take some of it as an offhanded compliment, really, and
Oh,
I've
yeah,
even
that's
I've
how I
even
would take it.
commented, on some of the, some guy actually put up an Amazon review saying, a 1-star review saying that I'm a complete fraud and that there's no evidence, there's no records anywhere showing that I grew up in Torrance or that I attended the schools that basically saying that I had fabricated my entire biography, which is just completely ridiculous. And I put a comment on there. It's like, I'm actually kind of flattered the lengths you people are willing to go to, to try to discredit me. And so yeah, I mean, some of the negative reviews that I've gotten are very questionable. Some of them are legitimate, because it is a very polarizing book. It's a book that people seem to either love or hate. My reviews tend to be either 5-star or 1-star with not a whole lot in between, So it's a book that really stirs passion in people, one way or another. Mostly positive, because like 70% of my reviews are overwhelmingly positive. But there's definitely people that don't take it well. So yeah, it definitely it arouses a lot of passion in people, either positively or negatively. So I guess that's a good thing, right? I mean,
Yes, it is definitely a good thing, because you see, when I don't think that a lot of those reviews that some of which are always totally 100% positive, then you start wondering how many of those are just trolls, doing the writing. So we're going to talk about your book today, Dave. But before we do, in your book, Charles Manson and his quote unquote family feature prominently. But did you just hear that? He's supposed to be getting married at age 80 to a 26-year-old.
yeah, is that bizarre or what? Yeah,
Is that bizarre?
they've already pulled the license and now they have like 30 days to close the deal or something. And yeah, I mean, why at this point, at this stage of his life, would he decide to get married? And what would for some fairly
20.
attractive, from what I've seen, pictures, 26-year-old woman want to marry a 80-year-old guy that's going to die in prison and probably fairly soon, I mean, he's not getting any younger.
Absolutely. It's
Uh,
bizarre only in
it is
California.
bizarre. I mean, I posted something about that on my book's Facebook page, and one of the responses I got, which kind of makes sense to me, is that he's possibly looking for sort of an executor, because he knows the end is coming soon, fairly soon. I mean, the fact that he lived to the age of 80 in confinement is pretty impressive already, So it's possible that he wants someone that
To tell his
that he
story, which
trusts to sort of oversee his legacy and the disposition of his property or whatever, and make sure that he gets a decent burial, or I don't know. I'm not going to claim to be able to get into the mind of Charles Manson and explain
right.
why he would do it, but it's very bizarre. And one of the more interesting aspects of it is that they are actually allowed to invite up to 10 non-inmate guests. So if anybody is
Why
looking for
don't why
something,
don't you why don't you try and try and finagle an invitation?
they get on the invite list. Yeah, I
Well,
would probably do it. I mean, how many opportunities like that are going to come along? It could be a
yeah.
very interesting event. I have, yeah, it's,
By the way,
yeah,
Dave, I heard some guy say this. Okay, this is kind of getting a little bit, because we do want to get into your book. I heard this story. Some guy claimed this, and I don't recall the exact reasons why he gave so, but he said that this whole Manson killing may actually have been a hoax. It was a staged operation for whatever reasons. I don't recall exactly, but I said, and at this point in my life, I'm ready to not dismiss anything at all, and that it was something that I had never heard before, because it is taken so much for granted as being a fact. But this is also something I've learned, that things that we generally take for granted, a lot of times they did not go down as they are reported. So that's just something in your research you may want one day to perhaps explore that possibility.
I've been getting hit up a lot lately for the last several months on Facebook and by email by people sending me links to that it's by a guy named Miles Mathis, I believe is his name, and
Okay.
it's fairly new theory, I believe. I don't think it's been up very long. At least I haven't been aware of it for very long. But for several months now, I've been getting a lot of people referring me to that article and commenting on it. And I haven't actually had. It's pretty long. It's like 80 pages long or something. It's like an 80-page PDF. And I haven't really had time to do much more than just skim through it at this point, so I can't really comment on it.
Well, the
It is a
possibility of it, considering like in your research, you know that there was this giant, most sophisticated movie studio on Laurel Canyon. So I mean, they
Yeah,
definitely
correct.
had the means to stage it so well that it could be, almost real, seem to be real. So that is a possibility that could have been done. Why? Who knows? Who knows all of these things. So anyway, that's something I just
Yeah,
wanted to throw out there. It's not really relevant to the whole discussion here.
yeah. I don't know what to make of it at this point. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that events are being staged now. Boston just reeked of staging, and Sandy Hook and the Woolwich or whatever incident in the
Oh yeah, yeah,
UK.
total,
There's been
total,
there's been
total.
there's been quite a
Even
few
this
lately.
latest one with this guy getting beheaded. Oh, it's like okay, all right, yeah, sure,
Yeah. But now they're saying that this guy's basically saying, "Hey, this isn't anything new. This started like 50 years ago,"
yeah,
which
yeah,
is,
yeah.
which would be a huge game changer if true. So I don't know. I don't know until I have a chance to really thoroughly look into it. I don't know what to say about it at this point, but I'm aware that that theory is now out there. So yeah.
Anyhow, like let's get back to this. You see, in my own case, a lot of information that has come my way in the past since I sort of going down this rabbit hole about 15 years ago or so, from researchers such as yourself about the real world is so surreal that sometimes I feel like Alice in Wonderland. And it didn't surprise me one bit that in your book you point out that there is in fact a street called Wonderland in Laurel Canyon, which is a very real place in LA that has shaped the culture of the latter half of the 20th century and into the present day. So, Dave, let's begin by discussing the title of your book and the place called Laurel Canyon. What is Laurel Canyon and why is it significant?
Laurel Canyon is one of many canyons that cut through the Hollywood Hills that basically separate the the west side of LA from the San Fernando Valley. And they're all of the canyons are nowadays are very upscale housing. And but back in the 60s, it was not as developed as it is today. And Laurel Canyon in particular became this sort of this huge really was the beginnings of the whole 60s youth counterculture and music movement, which is which is just only fairly recently being brought to light. Um,
So
there's
it,
been,
it wasn't like Haight Ashbury in San Francisco?
well, it actually preceded Haight-Ashbury and produced far more of the music that really provided the soundtrack for that era, and really kind of set the stage for the Haight, and which is one of the curious things about that whole era is that so few people know that Laurel Canyon actually preceded the Haight, and was the first place that the hairstyles and the clothing styles and the attitudes and the music and all of that would come to define the hippie movement really began here in LA in Laurel Canyon, and a few years before anybody had even heard of the Haight. And that's a story that's really only fairly recently come out. There's been a handful of mainstream books, beginning with Michael Walker's Laurel Canyon in I think 2007, which is the first that I'd ever even heard of it. And I grew up in L.A. and most people I know are the same way. Even people that grew up in L.A. just really have no idea that this was such a hugely influential part of launching that whole '60s movement. And so it's fascinating in a lot of ways, in that not even the mainstream version of the story is all that well known. And then when you factor in all of the darker elements that are highlighted in my book, then it becomes infinitely more fascinating. Just how this all came together, and why it's still to this day so little known. That there was this huge thriving music and counterculture scene right here in LA that took root before anybody had even heard of the terms hippie or Haight-Ashbury or any of that.
I suppose in a way it makes sense, because LA had already become, by the 60s, it was, of course, the movie capital, which began on the East Coast but moved into on the West Coast, I guess, starting even in the 20s and 30s. So by the 60s, it was definitely the entertainment, at least from movie perspective, it was. So to add the music element to it would be natural, I would think. So now this, in your research, okay, as far as myself, like we were talking in our before the show, that I was born and raised in India, so I didn't really grow up with any of this music. Okay, back when I was a teenager in the 70s, we didn't have a whole lot of Western music out there. I heard like some ABBA and Bee Gees and disco music and all that. But right, that was pretty much it. But then I moved to Canada when I was like 19, 20, and then that's where I found out about came across like the Beatles and the Doors and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and such, and I loved this music in those my younger days. But I am, even at this point in time in my life, Dave, I'm not familiar with many of the other early bands that you write about or their music. I'm familiar with the name, but not necessarily with their music, such as that of the Byrds, the Mamas and Papas, and Frank Zappa and such. But my interest in talking to you today was not so much to discuss individual bands like the Doors or personalities like Jim Morrison, but to explore the intelligence connection to almost all of these bands. Your research has proved that far from being an organic movement, the rock music and hippie movements were actually very carefully manufactured by the intelligence community, mostly the CIA. And even while they were being presented as rebels and anti-establishment, they were very much controlled and managed by the establishment that they were supposedly opposing. Now, this will, of course, is the information that you brought out that has, distressed a great deal of your readers. But right, am I correct that this is your conclusion? And if so, could you please elaborate on it by giving us a history of the rock age and the connection of rockers to spooks?
Yeah, that is my conclusion. It's not explicitly stated as so in the book, but with the facts presented, it's fairly obvious that what my own beliefs are. A lot of people wanted to write it off as just a lot of coincidences and whatnot, and we live in a very, very celebrity-driven culture and celebrity-obsessed culture, and we're very reluctant to give up our icons, and so some of this material does not set well with people, and these stars that I'm writing about, the Jim Morrisons and the Frank Zappas and the Stephen Stills and David Crosbys and all these bands are still very much larger than life today, and their music is still in heavy rotation on classic rock stations across the country, and these people are still very much household names and still very much idolized, and so casting aspersions on them does not necessarily go over well with some people. But the reality is just a staggering number of these people came directly from the military intelligence complex, from career military and military intelligence families. To a staggering degree, if you look down the roster of the people who fronted these bands or who emerged as the biggest stars of these bands, whether it's Frank Zappa with the Mothers of Invention, or John Phillips with the Mamas and the Papas, or Jim Morrison with the Doors, or David Crosby with the Byrds, or Stephen Stills with Buffalo Springfield, or on and on and on down the list. You find that time after time, these people all come from that very same background, this background of career military and military intelligence operations. And then you add to that the fact that some of them actually knew each other through those circles years and years before they arrived in Laurel Canyon. They all just sort of simultaneously arrived in Laurel Canyon and started producing this music. And, like Jim Morrison went to the same naval kindergarten with Frank Zappa's future wife, who was then Gail Sloatman. They knew each other through naval officer circles and attended the same naval kindergarten together. And then some 20 years later, they simultaneously show up in Laurel Canyon. He is this larger than life rock star, and she is the wife of another larger than life rock star, Frank Zappa, who happens to be, another son of. So I mean, the connections and the web is just it's mind-boggling. How many of these people come from this background, and how many of them actually had prior connections before they just happened to arrive in Laurel Canyon. And then you add to that the fact that there was actually a covert military facility in operation right there in Laurel Canyon, so you have all of these sons and daughters of the covert community, so to speak, many of them with previous connections, and all huddled around this covert military intelligence facility. And that just happens to be how and where the whole music and hippie scene was born. And that's a lot of coincidences to try to write off, and
so this covert facility that you're talking about, so you're saying that there was actually, it was right in Laurel Canyon that they had this whatever, it's a CIA station or whatever it was right there?
Yeah, right there, right on Wonderland Park Avenue, just off Wonderland Boulevard, right in the heart of Laurel Canyon. It was hidden in the woods of Laurel Canyon was this covert facility that functioned at least in part as a film studio. And no one really knows beyond that what else could have been going on there. The existence of the place wasn't even known until fairly recently. That was one of the things that amazed me when I started researching this book, is that I couldn't really find any references to this place. Even in the conspiracy literature, you can find references to other covert facilities, Area 51 or Weather Mountain or whatever it is. But there was seemingly no awareness, even in the conspiracy community, that this facility had even existed at all. Which was pretty strange, that they could have kept that under wraps. And
but I suppose that's how the covert world works. That the things that are really covert, nobody will really know about them. And the ones that people know about, they are not really covert.
Yeah, and then I discovered that the one of the guiding lights and founders of the Rand Corporation also was living in bopping around Laurel Canyon at that time. The future governor and lieutenant governor of the state, who's still our governor.
Yeah, Jerry Brown. I heard he's going to run for president again.
Yeah, I know. And a handful of the people that would later become what was known as the neocon cabal, these Paul Wolfowitz and his, various people that were involved in this project for a new American century and whatnot. They were there too,
Wasn't Ronald Reagan hanging around there as well?
I don't believe so, no. But I mean, there were just so many. It was just such this weird mix of actors, who also, to an overwhelming degree, came from military and military intelligence backgrounds. Musicians, from the same backgrounds. These up and coming politicians, and a couple of serial killers thrown in the mix for good measure. So you had this bizarre assemblage of people, in this tiny little geographic area, all clustered around a military facility, and
And
it was
all
it
these
was
military kids are coming. So what you're saying then is that there was a disproportionately large representation from the military intelligence complex of these people that came to be the big name rock stars and that were instrumental in launching this hippie movement.
yeah, and some of them some of their parents were people who were directly involved in orchestrating and escalating and whatnot the Vietnam War, which is what this whole countercultural movement, sort of grew up in resistance to,
Or in
So
supposed or in alleged resistance to, I would say.
yeah. So you have like Jim Morrison's father was actually the Navy admiral, and this just stunned people. This was one of the facts of the book that just absolutely stunned people initially, and they didn't want to believe it until the mainstream media reported it. When I was the only one saying it, then people were willing to just write it off as the rantings of a conspiracy theorist. But then when the mainstream media acknowledged that it was in fact true, then that kind of changed things. But
So Jim Morrison's dad was an admiral, from what I've
he
right.
was a Navy admiral. That much was known. But what wasn't known was that he was actually specifically the Navy admiral who was in command of the fleet of ships that were involved in the Tonkin Gulf incident that led directly to the introduction of ground troops and the major escalation of the Vietnam War, and ultimately to the deaths of some 60,000 Americans and a few million Vietnamese. And his father was a central figure in that. He was the point man. He was the guy who was overseeing and in command of that whole operation. And then just like a year or so later, here comes the son emerging, on Laurel Canyon and Sunset Strip as this hugely iconic figure of the anti-war movement. So you had this very strange juxtaposition of the father actually helping to orchestrate the war, while almost simultaneous with the son emerging as a symbol of the anti-war movement. And the same thing with Frank Zappa. His dad was a chemical warfare engineer, which means that he was probably, one of the people who were developing things like, napalm and Agent Orange and white phosphorus and all the crap that we were dumping on Vietnam, and while his son is also, parading around as kind of an icon of the anti-war crowd. So it was a very strange, to say the least, set of circumstances that led these particular people to become kind of the leaders and the figureheads of the youth movement.
What was also, just name a couple of other names about people that came from that would be considered to be big name stars that also came from military and intelligence background families.
Oh gosh, let's see. Stephen Stills, David Crosby, Jackson Brown, all three of the guys from America who were all sons of Air Force intelligence officers and who actually first met and got the band together on a Air Force base in the UK. Jackson Brown was born on a military base in occupied Germany, post-war Germany. His father was most likely working for the OSS. He was involved in reconstruction efforts in post-war Germany, where Jackson was born. See, who else? God, there's so many.
Right.
What was her name? Emmylou Harris was a grew up on a series of military bases in the Washington D.C. area. John Phillips was the son of a career Marine Corps officer, and his first wife, his mother, and his sister were all three career employees of the Pentagon. So I mean, his entire family, everyone around him was wrapped up in that. Um, Gosh, who else?
So anyhow, so these
I'm leaving
guys,
out a bunch of them, but they're all it's all detailed in the book.
right,
But
right, right.
there's a lot of them.
So the logical, I mean, if you were to look at this in a logical way, it would sort of make more sense that the kids of all these career army people and the defense department people, that they should be all clean cut, all American boys and gals. It wouldn't make sense for them to be these rebels, and these one or two might be, but for a whole clan of them to come out of that, it does not, it makes absolutely no sense. By the way, let me just introduce another idea here, which I'm sure you have already explored. I'm a bit of a science fiction buff. Are you familiar with the TV series Fringe?
Um,
Okay, well, let me tell you about that. Well,
wasn't that made by the X-Files people or
no, it's not.
something?
It's not the X. Maybe they have some involvement in it, but the reason I brought that up, because the premise in that show is that there was a group of kids, okay, that were given a powerful drug when very young, I believe around let's say 3 years of age and up through their preteen years, and then combined with psychological, possibly physical trauma, they were transformed into Manchurian candidates. This mind control, conditioning, and creation of alternate personalities, etc., took place on a military base in Jacksonville, Florida. This would seem to align with your research about a lot of these rock stars going to the same school on the military bases, naval bases, etc., and primarily in the DC area, which was, of course, the hotbed of MK Ultra and other mind control programs. And I would venture a guess that the story of the French TV show Kids is based on these real life super kids like Jim Morrison and John Phillips. So do you think that these kids they had some sort of more than just a normal upbringing as most of the American kids of that time were having?
Yeah, I do. I believe that they were groomed for those roles from a pretty early age, actually. Yeah, I think they were specifically groomed to fill those roles, and I'm not saying that they weren't talented. I mean, that's one of people ask me, well, are you saying that these people only got to the positions that they were in because of who they were and not because of talent? And no, I don't believe, I believe that many of these people were very talented. However, I also think that there were a whole lot of other kids in the country who were also very talented. And
Maybe
you got to
even
remember that.
maybe even more talented.
Yeah, I mean, this was the 1960s. Every kid in the country wanted to grow his hair out and pick up a guitar in front of a rock band.
Right.
And some of them had the chops to do it and some of them didn't. But everybody had that dream, and it's very, very hard for me to believe that the only people who I mean, the question that I ask is was it only the sons and daughters of the military intelligence complex who had the musical chops to rise to the top of the heap, or were those just the ones who were promoted into that position? And to me, the answer is clearly the latter, and there's no doubt in my mind that there were plenty of other kids out there who were equally talented and motivated, and they just didn't get the shot that these other people did.
Right. Even today, like when you look at even the music stars, so-called music stars, I was watching. I don't watch like TV and stuff as a rule, but sometimes when you catch these things, and I happened to see this program with Beyonce, and it seemed like it was so plastic and it was so unreal to me, and I'm going, man, is this what people consider talent? It doesn't seem
I
right.
know, I know. It's I mean, as controlled as I believe the music scene was in those days, there was talent, and the music that was created, still survives and has resonance for people today. And I just think that the star making machine has been refined now to such a point that talent is really kind of secondary at best. If you have a marketable face and an image, they can auto tune you and make you a star, regardless of you know your overall your actual level of talent. And it's just amazing today that these people can just come out of nowhere and just like overnight have, like, 100 million YouTube hits and 16 million Facebook followers, and just receive this international attention and recognition that's just wildly out of proportion to their actual talent. And it's very hard for me to believe that 50 years from now people will know or care or listen to Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande, or whoever the flavor of the month is right now. I just don't see that music having the staying power of what was produced in the 60s. So yeah, I think talent is not all that important anymore. It's more about who you are and if you can be managed, and if so, they can make you a star.
Oh yeah, yeah. Even in movies, guys like George Clooney, who was very much connected to the intelligence community, and also like Jennifer Lawrence, like these people. You watch some of their work and you go, man, what? This is supposed to be this. These guys are supposed to be winning Oscars because they got such great talent. No, they don't. They have connections. That's how they get where they are. So now in this, going back to Laurel Canyon. So what in the 1960s? What this was in the mid 60s that all of a sudden this whole gang started congregating in this one small area, and out of that came some of the most iconic and big name bands out of the 1960s. Is that correct?
That is correct. Just a dizzying array. Yeah, it began about 1964. The first album released was by the Byrds, Mr. Tambourine Man, which I believe was 64. And that really that lit the fuse. That pretty much sparked the whole folk rock revolution. And within just an amazingly short time, the canyon was just filled with these people who would become these, just huge, larger than life stars. The Doors, the Byrds, the Buffalo Springfield, Mamas and the Papas, the Turtles, Arthur Lee and Love, Three Dog Night, the Beach Boys, a whole slew of singer-songwriters like James Taylor and Carole King and Judy Sill and Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell and Jackson Brown, and then you had the sort of second wave of country rockers with like the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and just an amazing array of band. I'm leaving out like half of them because there's just so many that it's I can never remember them all, but just a mind-boggling array of singer-songwriters, bands, solo acts, just mind-boggling how much talent and it produced some of the biggest, to what are today still some of the biggest albums, best-selling albums of all time, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Eagles, Hotel California, or Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. Just huge. I mean, it just
Right.
hugely influential scene from like the mid 60s through like the mid 70s or so. It was just a constant flow of these huge name acts that either started out in Laurel Canyon or, like Fleetwood Mac, relocated to Laurel Canyon and kind of reinvented themselves. And yeah, just an amazing output of music that came out of this tiny little geographic area.
So now you say that these, your research is showing that these guys, like you said, they were not necessarily talented musicians. In some cases, you couldn't even hardly classify them as musicians because Jim Morrison, for example, he was not a musician by any stretch of that definition. Yet within a very short period of time, they became like superstars. I think that term, that word superstar probably didn't even exist before that era. So
Yeah,
how
probably not. And the word groupie too. It was the beginning of the groupie phenomenon as well. Yeah, but yeah, some of these guys. Yeah, that's another thing is that strongly would seem to suggest that this was not the organic grassroots sort of movement that we're to believe it is that some of these bands had a very strong appearance of having been cast. I mean, they weren't. It wasn't like you had these guys who, hey, I play guitar, you play drums, my friend plays bass, and we have similar musical interests. Why don't we get a band together? And it wasn't like that. Like the Byrds, the very first band out of the gate, the only real musician in the group was McGowan, who was a very accomplished 12-string guitarist, but the rhythm section had no idea what they were doing at all. The guy they recruited as a drummer, Michael Clark, by various accounts, had never played the drums in his life, and their bass player, Chris Hillman, was recruited from a bluegrass band where he was a mandolin player. He'd never played the electric bass guitar in his life, and these were the guys that they decided to throw together as the world's first folk rock band, and so it was a very inorganic process when you really break it down. I mean, yeah, these people, they didn't even play their own instruments on their first few albums. They had to have studio musicians come in and sub for them. So yeah, from that perspective, it's again, and also the speed with which this all happened. I mean, you read these stories, and these people would roll into town, and next thing you know, they have a band together, and they all have new instruments, and they've been signed, and they're in the studio recording songs. After just like weeks.
that
You
doesn't
know,
happen in real life, does it?
yeah. I mean, when you think of an organic grassroots movement, you think of struggling artists, spending years in the trenches, trying to get exposure and, maybe getting on college radio now and then if they're really lucky. And, if they keep at it for long enough, they might eventually break into the mainstream. But this wasn't like that at all. These people were coming into town and within weeks signing with major record labels, even in cases where they didn't really have the musical chops initially,
So
and
then even like what you're saying, David, is like in a normal course of events, like even to get national airplay, like in a band which has just come together, they would not necessarily have national distribution. They wouldn't be on the radio all across the country and soon across the world in that short period of time, unless they had established themselves and released a couple of albums that had climbed up the charts, etc. That would be the normal course of events. But it seems like these guys, like you're saying, they were signed right away. They have these big record labels are signing them, and their albums are just being played. Who started like all this radio play and everything for them, even in LA when they were unknown?
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's another thing is that all of the entities that were promoting and putting these people on the map were these huge corporate behemoths like Capitol Records and Columbia Records. These people, they weren't signing to like little indie labels, and then working their way up to try to catch the attention of the majors. They were being signed right off the bat to these major record labels and being, having their music played on corporate radio stations and being promoted in major, major circulation newspapers and magazines and on TV and all this stuff. And, you got to ask yourself if these people were really such a thorn in the side to the powers that be, if these people were truly, rocking the boat, why did they seem to have the backing of all these different avenues of corporate America? Why didn't they have to, work their way up the ladder, you know, as you would expect they would, you know, and struggle to get that kind of exposure. But instead, they just had it handed to them on a silver platter.
So it seems like it was some kind of, well, at least a social experiment, and maybe even some kind of social cultural operation to basically change the whole face of America.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me. Yeah, and you know, particularly the anti-war movement. I think they wanted to tarnish the anti-war movement as much as possible, and transfer it away from, you know, colleges and college professors and college students, which is where it began. The anti-war movement, you know, and nowadays everyone. To most people, the hippies and the anti-war, you know, anti-Vietnam War movement are pretty much synonymous, but it didn't actually start out that way. There was actually already a pretty well established anti-war movement that was centered on college campuses by, you know, very respectable, clean-cut, you know, college professors, and they're equally, you know, clean-cut, respectable collegiate students. And I believe that this was really a deliberate effort to put a far more unappealing face on the anti-war movement. And you know, I mean, and you know, I mean, the hippies for you know, like mainstream America, Bible Belt America or whatever. I mean, these people might as well have been from Mars, you know, with these crazy hairstyles and this music they were listening to, and preaching the virtues of drug use and free love, and you know, inventing their a whole new lingo, and you know, all this jargon. And I mean, they had like just this completely foreign look and sound and attitudes, and I mean, it couldn't have been more engineered to, you know, to turn off most you know, mainstream Americans, you know. I mean, to me, you know, I grew up kind of idolizing the hippies. You know, kind of, I viewed them in a very positive way, and but I don't think that's really true of you know, most rank and file Americans, especially back in that era. I think that was quite a shock to their sensibilities when this whole thing happened. And so yeah, I think it was absolutely a an effort to marginalize and control the opposition movement, and not just the anti. I mean, there were all kinds of thriving social movements in the 60s, you know, civil rights and women's liberation, and, you know, the Black empowerment, Black Panther movement, and elderly rights. And, you know, it was a time when a lot of people were clamoring for social change. And all of that kind of got eclipsed and subsumed by the hippies and the flower children. And that became the face that to this day everyone associates with all of the, you know, all of the movement for social change in the 60s. They became the face of all of that.
But in reality, like, you know, especially in regards to these guys that you write about, Jim Morrison, John Phillips, and such, if you were to really study their life, they were anything but socially conscious. They were actually very hedonistic in their lifestyles, were they not? Especially,
Yeah, absolutely.
and also, like, this was the era which drug usage went really mainstream, and these guys were actually very instrumental in planning that idea in people's minds that the usage of drugs was somehow a cool thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course they paid no consequences for that too, which is another thing that's highlighted in the book, is that you know, the state had tools at their disposal that they could have used to control these voices if they really wanted to. One of which was the draft. You know, virtually all of these people were draft age males that were pouring into Laurel Canyon and forming these bands. And you know, not one of them that I could find Anyway, not a single member of any of the bands that came out of Laurel Canyon ever had their career interrupted by the draft. Despite the fact that, tens of thousands of kids elsewhere in the country were being shipped off to Vietnam, these guys were not, and they were flagrantly flouting the nation's drug laws. And, whether you agree with those laws or not is irrelevant in this case. But, there were very strong laws on the books. And, these people were openly using and promoting the use of, and in some cases, fairly openly trafficking, illegal substances. And so the state had to, without even being heavy-handed about it. I mean, these people were all but begging to be either drafted or imprisoned, and yet they never were.
Well,
So again,
there's other way of looking at it, Dave, is that we know it's been made quite obvious in recent times that one of the jobs that the CIA, for example, does is the importation and distribution of drugs. So maybe if they are in the employ of the intelligence, community, then they would be like their sales rep, and no wonder then that they were never touched as far as flaunting of all the drug laws was concerned. They were helping promote the product that was being imported by their handlers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the government does not want to stop the drug trade, not by any stretch of the imagination. Number one, they make a whole lot of money off of it. And number two, a drugged population is easier to control than a non-drug population. That's the reality. Despite what people think that, these drugs in the 60s opened their mind and liberated them and whatnot. I don't know that that's necessarily true. So, yeah, absolutely. The government is perfectly happy to allow the drugs to flow. They have multiple reasons for wanting that.
Right. So, being they were almost all coming from a military background, you will think that at least some of them would have had the urge to go and enlist and go defend their country, which was at war. But but that was not the case. They were living a very high life, no pun intended here, but they seem to be living it up. And now all this business with the flower power and peace, love, and rock and roll, that also is a myth, because the degree of violence associated with this Laurel Canyon and these bands, it's almost unprecedented, because a lot of the bands, these guys themselves met an untimely death, but there was also a lot of murder and mayhem that has accompanied them since the very beginning. Wasn't that the case, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just a staggering amount of violence providing the backdrop of this scene that was supposed to be all about, peace, love, and understanding, and love your brother and all of that. And yet it's just there's just an amazing amount of blood that flowed out of that canyon. The book goes into quite a bit of detail on just a mind-boggling number of deaths of people who either died in Laurel Canyon or who died under very suspicious circumstances elsewhere, who were very closely connected to that scene. And two of the most obviously two of the city's what are generally regarded as the two bloodiest mass murder scenes in LA's very bloody history. Both directly connected to the Laurel Canyon scene: the Manson murders in 1969 and the so-called Wonderland or Four on the Floor murders in 1981, which both involved 5 victims. In the Manson murders, all 5 of them died. In the Wonderland, one of the 5 miraculously survived; the other 4 were killed. And both of those just directly connected to that scene. The Wonderland murders actually occurred in Laurel Canyon. In this peaceful, bucolic community, you had a quadruple murder. There's this brutal, bloody quadruple murder right there, in the midst of it, and numerous other people. Silent film star Ramon Navarro was killed in his home in Halloween 1969, right on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. Inger Stevens, a starlet from the earlier Hollywood era, turned up dead in her home during that same era. And Lenny Bruce found dead in his home. Sal Mineo found dead, murdered in the driveway of his home, just at the mouth of Laurel Canyon. Diane Linkletter, flew out the window of her apartment at the mouth of Laurel Canyon. And those are just the names that are known, the famous names. And then
Right.
there's just a staggering array of and then some of the artists themselves. Graham Parsons died under very unusual circumstances out in Joshua Tree. Clarence White, just a whole bunch of them, and then a whole lot of lesser knowns like Graham Nash's girlfriend was murdered. David Crosby's girlfriend was, I don't remember how, but she was killed. Jackson Brown's wife, listed as a suicide. Just a staggering number of deaths, of some famous and some, infamous, and some pretty much unknown. But in total, just a mind-boggling number of violent or suspicious deaths that afflicted that area during its heyday.
Now, Dave, if these guys had been subjected to some kind of programming, okay, in their youth or in their childhood, they would not have had what would be a normal childhood, or the normal, they wouldn't grow up as a normal family does. So to begin with, they are already have, a totally bizarre and abnormal upbringing. So then they, later on in their life, they go on and do all these crazy things, which, a normal person, first of all, wouldn't do. A lot of just the way they dressed and the way they talked and the way they, whatever, this was not normal by any stretch of the imagination. So it is not a stretch then that, they also did other things like, wasn't there some guy that killed his wife in front of his daughter or something, like, to do those kind of crazy psycho things? Because in on certain level, most of them were sociopathic and psychopathic.
Yeah, that was Spade Cooley, who was actually a precursor to the Laurel Canyon scene. He was a guy that a lot of the Laurel Canyon people admired and cited as sort of an influence on the whole country rock movement that kind of grew up there. And yeah, he was viewed as a very influential figure from the past. And yeah, he had murdered his wife right in front of their daughter, and then gone to prison, and literally, like, on the eve of his release, he dropped dead or something. Very, very unusual death. He was let out to, like, do a concert or something, and then he was supposed to be permanently released, like just like days later or something, and he dropped dead before he got out. And then there was also one of the big name LA DJs who was influential in launching a lot of these bands and first getting them on the air and getting them airplay and getting them exposure. He also went to prison for murdering his wife. So yeah, I mean, these people that were supposed to be all about peace, love, and understanding tended to have a little bit of a violent streak, and some of them were known to carry guns. I mean, these were supposed to be the figureheads of the hippie movement, all about peace and love and understanding, and yet you had guys like David Crosby and Gene Clark and John Phillips and various other people acknowledging that they routinely carried guns, and why are these people carrying guns around in Laurel Canyon, and in this bucolic hippie commune, So there's a lot of things that suggest that these people were not necessarily who we were supposed to perceive them as being, and yeah, there was a lot of violence lurking in the just behind the scenes.
So now it seems like, like that this was definitely it was almost like a Hollywood production in creating these bands, and in a sense it was. And let's talk a little bit about the club scene, which really helped bring these guys into the limelight, and the help that these bands had from absolutely non-music sources such as the Freaks that really help make these guys into megastars and superstars. So talk about that scene that really made these guys into much bigger than they should have been if based on their natural talent.
Yeah, there was the so-called Young Turks and the Freaks were hugely influential because when these bands first started spilling out of the canyon, nobody had ever heard of them, and this music was pretty new to most people's ears, and you know this nobody knew these bands or who they were or were familiar with this music or anything, and the clubs that provided the venues for these bands initially, the Whiskey A Go Go and the Kaleidoscope and London Fog and a whole bunch of other ones. They just magically like started popping up along Sunset Strip, just in time to accommodate and provide venues for all these new bands. All of a sudden you had all these new clubs opening up, but these clubs did not have a standing clientele. Nobody was familiar with the clubs any more than they were with the bands. So what really started drawing the people in was number one, the Young Turks. You had people like Warren Beatty and Bruce Dern and Peter and Jane Fonda and Sharon Tate and all these people from that crowd, Dennis Hopper and Sal Mineo and all these people that were kind of associated with what was known as the Young Turks, these hot up and coming Hollywood stars and starlets. And they would regularly attend the clubs, and that was highly publicized, in the local press, that if you went out to these clubs, you could literally rub shoulders with these people who were destined to become these huge Hollywood stars. And so that was a major draw. And the other draw was what were known as the Freaks, this troupe of dancers led by this guy Vito Pelikas, who are credited from a variety of sources as being the very first hippies, the people that really pioneered the whole hippie look and mentality and whatnot, the clothing styles and whatnot, and they would regularly go out to these clubs and put on these wild, insane dance performances that nobody had ever seen anything like that. Nobody had ever seen people dressed like this or wearing their hair like this or moving like that, and it was just a huge spectacle. And so much so that the club owners would let these people in for free because they drew such a crowd. And there are quotes in the book from people, even band members and people like Gail Zappa, even acknowledging that the draw initially was not the bands and was not the music. It was the chance to see this huge spectacle taking place on the dance floor and to possibly rub shoulders with these idolized movie stars. And so both of those things were very, very heavily promoted, that if you went out to the clubs, that's what you would see. And that served a couple purposes. Number one was getting people into these clubs to build an audience for these bands. And also, and this is also acknowledged, by people who are on the scene, also distracting attention away from the fact that a lot of these bands weren't really all that good live. In the studio, they could have studio musicians cover for them, but on stage, they had to play it themselves. So the music coming from the stage did not necessarily sound like what people were hearing on the radio. And so, having these distractions was a huge benefit to the bands to draw attention away from the stage and onto the dance floor. So they kind of wanted people to be paying more and more attention to all the distractions than to the actual music. So it served two purposes. So those two groups were were hugely influential. And again, both of those groups have very curious connections. You know, the Young Turks come from the very same background as the musicians. You know, Dennis Hopper's dad was OSS, and Bruce Dern's grandfather, I think it was like Skull and Bones, and his godparents were like sitting First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson. I mean, it's just very deep political connections that these people had, just as the rock stars themselves did. And the Pelikas crew, he was actually related by marriage to the Rockefeller clan of all people. I mean, this is the last name that you would associate with the birth of the hippies, right? Is Rockefeller. And yet here you have this guy who is cited by various people as being the country's first hippie. And yeah, he has he was related to the Rockefellers. So again, you know, you have the people who were really helping. Again, you see that the people who not only in the bands, but the people who helped to break and put these bands on the map. You see these same kind of connections just over and over again.
You know, Dave, it doesn't surprise me that when you talk about this guy being connected to the Rockefellers or to Eleanor Roosevelt and other, big wigs in politics and business and industry, because as your research has revealed quite well to you and to your readers, is that the elites, the people that we call the elites, they are their mores and their lifestyles. To describe them as depraved it would be to put it mildly, okay? And the kind of activities that they indulge in, such as pedophilia, and even worse, is quite well documented. So if they are financing this movement, then it is not surprising to me that the same sort of depravity and same sort of lack of morals, etc., is being displayed by their, let's say, proteges. So, and you're right, there had to be some kind of big financing behind this. Somebody had to be pulling the strings to bring in the Young Turks, for example, into these clubs. I mean, you don't just have a club owner with a small new club, and he just can't call up the Hollywood A-list and have them show up at his club, unless there is somebody with a little bit more pull that is involved, and that, according to your research, of course, is what we term.
Yeah, it all seems way too coordinated. You know, the simultaneous arrival of all these artists, the simultaneous popping up of all of these clubs, and just all the sordid connections that the club owners had and the promoters had and the managers and the artists themselves. And I mean, it's very hard to find someone who doesn't have some kind of, taint attached to them in some way from, I mean, anybody that was influential, either up front as the artist or the people working behind the scenes to craft people's careers and promote them and get them on the map. You just find the same thing just over and over again. And, at some point it becomes difficult to write that all off as coincidence. Some people want to, they really want to believe that, their heroes were virtuous and, but, for me, at some point, the case just becomes overwhelming.
Well, not only were they not virtuous, some of them had some very, pedophilic or at least Lolita tendencies, like you write about this guy, John Phillips, for example, him and him abusing his own daughters. Actually, I did see an interview once with his daughter, Mackenzie Phillips, and she was talking about the time when, right in John's presence, she was bedded by Mick Jagger, and she claimed she was 18 at that time, but it's more likely that she was covering up. And she said that my father was trying to stop Mick, but I would think that it was probably the other way around, where he was passing around to Mick Jagger. And Mick Jagger is another character which features in your story with the concert at Altamont. So these guys were not very nice people, in the type of activities that they were involved in.
Yeah, I mean, there's reports of Vito Polikas passing his 3-year-old son naked around a crowd, and of staging live sex shows with like 13, 14-year-old girls. And there's stuff in Frank Zappa's bio that's very questionable. As far as the practices that he had with his kids and whatnot. And and of course John Phillips, with McCann, and at least one of his other daughters has alluded to inappropriate acts by John Phillips as well. And yeah, there's a lot of allusions to that type of thing. And it's been around for a long time in political and entertainment circles. And it's starting to come out now to some extent. I don't really know where it's headed, but particularly in the UK of late, there seems to be a lot of new revelations coming out. And a lot of this stuff seems to be bubbling to the surface after all of these years. Whether it's whether it's going to ever go anywhere or not remains to be seen. But
Why,
yeah,
it never goes anywhere. Like for example, in the Catholic Church, the Vatican, the British royalty, the European royalty, like pedophilia cases and not just pedophilia, like in Belgium, all the big things
yeah.
the revelations that came, and nothing really gets done because these people are, the rich and the powerful. They control the police forces, and then of course a lot of those.
Absolutely they do. They control the police, they control the courts, they control everything. And at best, they'll toss out a few sacrificial lambs and then sweep the rest under the rug and carry on, as if nothing happened, which is what happened in Belgium. The government eventually had to give up toss a couple of breadcrumbs to the people, basically. But for the most part, the guilty parties always escape because they're just far too powerful. And yeah, they control the political realm, the legal realm, the media. I mean, they're well protected.
So
But it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
No, no, no. I agree. I agree with you. These revelations, of course, have come out a lot more in the past 30 years or so, I would say. But at the same time, not nearly enough happens or is done in this. By the way, that's an interesting segue into the connection, not just to the intelligence, but other branches of the intelligence community, such as this process church that you keep finding with these guys in the rock and roll and the rockers. And the process church, of course, was very much, or the thing called the process. They were, from what I believe, even in the DC time, they were once busted, some of them with some heavy duty child pornography and everything else. And again, nothing came out of that, but they have been very much involved in child trafficking and, pornography and such things. And there were connections with those type of groups, and even with Jim Jones for some of these guys, weren't there, in Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, there was a lot of very shady connections, to say the least. Yeah, I mean, a lot of connections to I mean, it's amazing how many of these people were close to Manson, and how quickly they distanced themselves once the murders and the arrest came down. But prior to that, there was a number of people who had very close ties to Manson, and nothing but praise for him. I mean, there's quotes in the book is people just like praising him as this, profound musical genius or something. And yeah, so Yeah, that was, the Process Church, the Manson family, the Church of Satan up in San Francisco, all kind of, spun a web through this scene. And yeah, there's just there's a lot of sordid connections. It's amazing how many things, how many of these different lines kind of converge there in Laurel Canyon. I've noted before that all roads seem to lead to Laurel Canyon because there's just it's mind-boggling how many things can be connected to that scene.
So then that was the you could say the headquarters of this new age that began in the mid 60s there, that would usher in this a new type of a musical scene in which these guys became larger than life. I guess we had Elvis Presley and maybe guys like Frank Sinatra, but they were not really on they were not on the same scale as these rock groups turned out to be. And what about the British
Yeah,
invasion boys?
it's
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
haven't really looked at I haven't looked that much into them. People have asked me about that. Hey, are you going to do the same thing with the British invasion? I've always also gotten, hey, you should do the same thing with the Seattle grunge scene, and you should do the same thing with the punk and new wave movement, and all these other scenes, which I'm sure that there's just is equally interesting stories to be told. On all of those. Whether I'll be the one to tell them or not, it remains to be seen. There's only so many hours in the day, and lots of other stuff that I'm curious about. So whether I will continue on with in the same sort of vein, I don't know. But as of now, I don't really know a huge amount about the British invasion bands, other than the times when their paths crossed with Laurel Canyon crowd. John Lennon was a kind of a regular around there for a while, and Mick Jagger and his band stayed there for a bit. During like the Altamont time and whatnot. So I've only looked into them in relation to how they interacted with how they what influence or whatever they had on the Laurel Canyon kind of thing. But in general, I don't know a whole lot about the British invasion bands.
So now looking back in hindsight, Dave, do you think that this whole rock music scene, all through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the present day, has it been something that has been positive and beneficial for society and for people in general, or there is something that the negatives of it, outweigh whatever may be considered positive about it?
I think the negatives definitely, and definitely more so, into modern times and getting progressively worse. And as we talked about before, the artists who are getting, just worldwide attention and astronomical sales these days, to me, they're just nowhere near on the same level of talent as some of the stars from bygone eras, and the symbolism and has just become so blatant and in your face, in the music videos and in the real high profile live performances now, like at the Super Bowl and the Grammy Awards and whatnot.
So
They've kind of become joking.
you're referring to some kind of satanic symbolism.
Oh yeah, the occult and Masonic symbolism is just all over the place. I mean, like the Grammy Awards and the Super Bowl halftime show seem to have become kind of like showcases now to throw that out there in people's faces. And yeah, it's really become blatant, and it seems to be more about pursuing an agenda and pushing the symbolism than actually producing listenable music these days. To my mind, anyway.
So is that a connection, the spiritual connection? Because you in your book, and it's impossible for it not to be with this whole scene, Satan, satanic, Satanism, as such. It just seems natural to connect such terminology with this whole scene. And as you said, that it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. Have you looked at the spiritual elements of this here? That when we call this scene, when you say it's dark or the dark heart, uh, is there actually a connection to the Prince of Darkness?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big believer in the, objective existence of Satan, so to speak. And,
Why not?
I know a lot of people are.
I
Just,
mean,
I
the
don't know.
evidence would, from what your own research, would that not be something that would be a logical conclusion that this is not just happening in a purely human realm, but maybe there is something which is more sinister and darker, and perhaps even if it is invisible, the energy that exudes from it is that evil, dark energy, not just coming from within the human. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Is that not?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people believe it very literally, and they believe very much and they believe that performing these satanic rituals and stuff can actually bestow power upon people, and taking lives, can increase your power and whatnot. And I don't know that I really buy into that. I know that I'm sure that a lot of people who self-identify as Satanists actually believe that. I don't know that the people at the top of the food chain really believe that, or if it's just a way to manipulate other people's belief systems. Yeah, I don't know. For
No,
me,
no. I mean,
I don't see it
I'm
as
just
a.
like I personally believe it, David. Okay, like because I believe in the Bible. I believe in Jesus Christ. I understand, not just believe it. I mean, I understand it. So for me, that there is an invisible world, which we that idea that all that exists is only what we can see with our eyes is not very intelligent to me. I mean, I can easily understand that there may be, and we have to allow for the possibility of something beyond, because we live in such a finite space, and we are surrounded by infinity. Anything is possible out there. And the explanation of the type of evil that that has been revealed by the research of people like yourself, it it doesn't make sense to me on a purely human realm. Okay, so that's why I do. But at the same time, if you don't or somebody else doesn't, that's okay. I don't take issue with that. I'm just saying that I personally do believe that yeah, there is a real Satan, which of course would imply that there is a real God, and there's real evils, which means that there's real good. But that's something which each person, in their own individual, they have to work that out for their own selves. But from my research and what
Correct.
I have read, that the elites actually on the very top of the food chain, they, as a matter of fact, are very ritualistic. And I believe that they, most of all, do believe this in all of this here, and perhaps for good reason.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's no doubt that these people are bringing evil upon the world. I mean, that's pretty self-evident. Whether it's a literal or spiritual or metaphorical evil, I mean, that could be debated endlessly among different belief systems. But there's no question that these people are just inherently evil and engaged in stuff that's just so far removed from what people want to believe. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that protects them, is that they're really protected by the fact that their actions are just so purely evil and so outside the realm of what most people would consider, the reality of the world that we live in nowadays, that they're really protected, but to an extent, by just just how far removed from public belief that they really are. So that when even when this stuff does threaten to break through the public consciousness and leak out, people really tend to not want to believe it because it's just so it's just so foreign to them. The whole concept that these people could be engaged in that type of evil behaviors is just so far removed from what people want to believe. That it serves as a protection, mechanism for them.
Yeah,
If that makes any sense.
it does make sense, and there's a saying something to the effect that Satan's biggest trick is to convince people that he doesn't exist. Uh, anyhow, but this research of yours, perhaps I would highly recommend your book because it is a very interesting read, and I did read it within a couple of days. Once I started it, I couldn't really put it down, and I am actually also going to order and read your other book, Program to Kill, which I do want to talk about as well, because this topic is not necessarily so much about rock music or rock musicians, but it is
from the material, and read it in from an edit.
Dave, hold on for 1 second. There seems to be a little the connection dropping out. Can you just hold on for 1 second?
And then all of a sudden they realize that they just covered the last 10 pages as a reader rather than as an editor, and then they'd have to back up to start over to actually go through it as an editor. And that's a huge compliment to me. I mean, that's probably the greatest compliment that I could get from someone is telling me that it was very hard to sort of detach themselves and read it from the technical standpoint. So I'm very gratified and very happy with the reception overall that it's gotten, and hopefully more people will continue to pick it up and give it a chance.
Excellent. I want to sorry we this connection in the last minute or two has been kind of fading in and out, but that's okay. We did get most of the information in that we wanted to. But before we stop here, Dave, I do want to recommend your book, which is titled Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. And it is available directly from your website, I believe. So could you please go ahead and tell listeners about your website and where they can order your books? And secondly, I would
it is. My website is kind of a handful. It's the URL is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. The easiest way to find it is just by Googling my name, either Dave McGowan or David McGowan, or Google Center for an Informed America, and that will take you there. And once you get there, you'll see links to get to the order page. And I actually just lowered my prices for the holidays. I'm offering special through the end of the year, special holiday discounts, and you can basically pick up signed copies for me for the same or less than what Amazon has got them at. So I would it definitely benefits me far more if people come directly to me rather than through Amazon. So that's where you can find it. And I have, like I say, I have sale prices on both Weird Scenes and Program to Kill, and a special package deal for people who want both, and also multi copy discounts if anyone is looking to maybe pick up a couple extra copies to give out as
let me put a plug in here for you, Dave, for this book especially. I haven't read Program to Kill yet, but I'm definitely going to order that directly from you. But folks, this book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, will make a great Christmas present. So any if you're planning to give out Christmas present, buy a whole batch and give them out.
I think you really like Program to Kill based on what this kind of stuff that you brought up and referenced during this interview. I think you would really like it. Actually, it's I think it would be right up your alley. So.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to getting that and reading it, and then also maybe having you back on to continue this topic, because there's a lot more information in this book that is not possible to cover in an hour or so, and I also want to link it to your other book, like Program to Kill. I have a general idea of what it's about. I heard an interview that you did with my friend Visigoth Keith Hansen down in Florida a few years ago, and I
Oh,
listened.
you know him? Yeah.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
retired, or he told me he was done. He told me he was hanging up his microphone. In fact, I did his final show with him, or what he told me was going to be his final show. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know if he's gonna, I don't know if he's sticking to that or not, but yeah, last I heard, he told me he was hanging up the microphone and
yeah, I think he's
gonna
kind of
walk away.
hung it up. I have had him on my show a few times, so but I don't think he does his show anymore. Yeah, so he's well, maybe he does actually. He may not do it on a regular basis, but he is still recording shows. I think his website is thinkorbebeaten.com. It used to be Think or Be Eaten, but now it's thinkorbebeaten.com. But Dave, again,
Is it? Okay.
I'll put a link to your website in this program. Once I have it up, I'll send you the link, and I'll put a link to your website so listeners can access it directly from the YouTube video. Other than that, any closing remarks? Because we're kind of running out of time here. So until next time, what would you like to leave us with?
Um, I don't know. I guess we should mention the Kennedy assassination, right? I mean, it's we've been talking about the '60s, and we're what, like 2 days away from the anniversary here. What will this be? The 51st anniversary of the JFK assassination. So
Oh
I don't
yeah,
really know.
yeah, yeah. It was the 50th
It's
last year,
not.
so it'll be the
It's not.
51st. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be 2 days from now. It'll be the 51st anniversary. Yeah, 51 years it's been since he was gunned down, and that's not my area of expertise. I know that there are many, many, many other people out there who are far more well versed in the minutia of the Kennedy assassination than I am. But just to acknowledge the passing of the date, I guess should just throw that out there. That 2 days from
Yes.
now will be 51 long years since Kennedy was gunned down in Dealey Plaza. So
I know. That is an event, of course, which is still resonates deeply with many people. And another press that got gunned down, of course, was Lincoln. And I heard you say on your last program that that you are doing some research on the Lincoln assassination, about which I have done some programs with Visigoth, because he's sort of up on that as
yeah, he's
well.
done that. Yeah, he's fed me some information. Yeah, he's been looking into that also of late. Yeah, so I've been looking into that one. Primarily because I just feel like the Kennedy assassination has just been done to death. I mean, you could fill up an entire bookstore with books written on the Kennedy assassination, and even though even with the passage of 150 years, there's actually much, much less information available on Lincoln than there is on Kennedy. So yeah, and that one's coming up on the 150th anniversary, April of next year. 4 or 5 months, we'll be hitting the 150-year mark on old Abe. It was April 14th, 1865. So we're coming up very quickly on 150 years on that one. So
Wow.
yeah, I've been doing some research on that one, and a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, it's just amazing, just how much has been kept covered up for so long now. Yeah, fascinating topic.
Well, there was.
Not it doesn't
Sorry.
it hasn't captured people's imaginations nearly to the extent that Laurel Canyon did. Laurel Canyon resonates far more with people than Lincoln has, at least so far. But it's going to become much more high profile, I would think, with the 150-year anniversary coming up. There's going to be a lot more attention focused on old Abe. So
Well, I
anyway,
mean,
yeah, that's what I.
the
That
music.
that series is freely available, by the way, on my website. I think it's up to 9 or 10 parts now, and on that same website where I directed people to get the books, you can access that whole Lincoln series for free for anyone who's interested in that particular topic. And no matter what how much research you may have done on the Lincoln assassination, I'm guessing that there's going to be stuff in there that's new to you, because I've dug pretty deeply into it and still working on it. But yeah, the Kennedy was the big one in my. I mean, before 9/11, the JFK assassination was far and away the most significant political event of my lifetime. Now I would probably say that 9/11 kind of eclipsed that.
Right, right. So Dave, it'll be good to have you back on, and we can talk about these things like 9/11 and other false flags like Boston and Sandy Hook and such. There was another angle I wanted to get into you with that, but not we didn't have time today, which is that music also is a very strong and powerful programming device, which is, if you remember that movie Clockwork Orange, when they're trying to program this guy, they're playing this music and Wagner and, and in Apocalypse Now, when they're going in to bomb those villages, they've got music blasting full blast and Hitler's rallies. It is a very, very powerful tool that the elites are well aware of, and that angle as to what other purpose that these rock bands serve besides just being, discrediting the anti-war movement is something that I would like to discuss with you perhaps in our next program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the real quickly another of the interesting aspects of the Laurel Canyon scene is that some of the people behind the scenes who were sort of engineering the sound were from had radio intelligence backgrounds. Like the Grateful Dead sound engineer was Augustus Owsley, who, in addition to being the premier acid guru of the '60s, was a guy who had been trained in radio and electronic intelligence, and Frank Zappa, he learned the ropes from this guy who's I can't remember his name, but same thing. He had learned his craft in the military, in military intelligence, doing electronic and radio intelligence, and then they segued into being sound the people who really helped to shape the sound of these bands. So you got to wonder what what was going on with all that. But anyway, we could get into all that in the next one then, if you would like. And I guess
Oh
we should
yeah,
probably
I would
sign
love
off
to.
now.
I love that kind of stuff, where because this is not fiction anymore about this idea, like for example in TV commercials, etc., where they have a hidden signal that is piggybacking on the what's audible, but inside there is something which may be inaudible, but that is more powerful because it is absorbed subconsciously. And this whole idea about backward masking in records and all that, at one time I thought that was just crazy theories, but no longer. I'm sure that went on, and now that you bring out this fact that these guys were military trained sound engineers, then it's not surprising at all that this was going on and still going on today.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, like back in the early '70s or late '60s, early '70s, when there was a big scandal about the theaters putting in subliminal messages during the intermissions to encourage people to go buy popcorn and sodas from the snack bars. You remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was, it seemed kind of ridiculous at the time, but that was probably the early stages, and those processes have become much more refined and technologically advanced these days.
Oh,
And yeah, we're manipulated in a whole bunch of ways that we don't even realize.
well, Dave, it's been a slice. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and the audience. And once again, I will definitely look.
There once was a man named Jesus who lived near Galilee. God sent him as his chosen son to set all mankind free. Born the son of a carpenter in a small village town, but many a man his mind conceived that he'd wear the holy crown. And God our Lord, he sent him out so that we could receive the message of eternal life to all who would believe. He gathered many followers from far off lands they came, and many a soul would be reborn through the power of Jesus' name. And through his works he spread his love to all that he would find. He helped the poor and raised the dead and touched to heal the blind. But Jesus was not understood, and as was prophesied, they hung him on that Calvary tree where for our sins he died. This King of Kings, his love so great we could not comprehend. And when 3 days had come to pass, our Savior rose again.